yes or no?
Well, I don't personally know, Chair. I think the inquiry is looking at that very point that you.
What's your gut feel?
If you want to know what his gut feeling really is, you'll have to wait and see. But let's start with the witnesses of last week's Business and Trade Committee meeting, where Alan Bates, founder for Justice for Sub-Postmasters Alliance, and Joe Hamilton, a former sub-postmistress, to get some feeling or some view of what they had to go through, where Tory MP Joe Marson basically asked, how did it happen?
How would it happen? I really think it was because of Post Office. I mean, when you take on a sub-post office, you actually invest a large amount of money in that business. And as happened in my case, when they fell out with me, they walked off with that amount of money. And I think a lot of people feel there's a financial gun held to their head if they start kicking off or start raising too many problems with Post Office. And cases like mine, cases like Lee's, I mean, these become reasonably high profile in the area, and Post Office like to push them through, or they used to like to push them through, I don't know if they still do, as examples, as warnings to others to keep your head down and do as you're told.
What about you, Joe?
I was the opposite. They convinced me that it was all my fault, and I wasn't tech savvy at all back 20 years ago, and yeah, they convinced me it was my fault. And that kind of, it was before the days of social media, so you felt like I really was alone, and I thought I must have pressed something and reversed something that then doubled the next day, and yeah, I just thought I'd made a hash of it. But when ultimately I went to court and it made the national papers, and people rang me up after seeing the piece in the paper, and I realised it wasn't me, it wasn't just me, then it just makes you so angry that, you know, they literally gaslit me for about 3 years, that, you know, and turned me, well, not into a basket case, but pretty much. And then that lit a fire. And yeah, thank goodness we had the publicity because we joined up. But, you know, it's wrong, but it's taken this long and this much money to get to where we are today. And, you know, I know a lot of the group, and they are literally falling apart, waiting for the end of this to be able to put it behind them.
I cannot imagine what these people had to go through. I've got to admit, I cannot imagine how I would have coped if I had to deal with this. But later on, Labour's Charlotte Nichols brought up the National Federation of Sub-Postmasters, and both Alan Bates and Joe Hamilton's reactions was very interesting.
Thank you, Chair. One of the recurring themes throughout this has been all of the people that thought that it was only happening to them, and the gaslighting that you referred to happening, Joe. The Justice for Sub-Postmasters Alliance has obviously done some absolutely extraordinary work in convening those affected, supporting them and seeking justice. But I'm interested to know your view of the role of the National Federation of Sub-Postmasters within this, as surely there's alarm bells that should have been going on there, and an expectation from their members that they would get support that didn't materialise. Do you think an independent trade union could have made a difference here? If I could start with you, Alan.
Oh yeah, I mean, the Federation were in bed with Post Office from day one. And as far as I know, they probably still are, because they're paid for lock, stock and barrel by Post Office. And it should be entirely independent. It really has to be. I mean, it's utter madness. They've refused to support any sub-postmaster in any legal action against Post Office. In fact, I believe it was it's incorporated into their charter that they were not allowed to act against Post Office, otherwise they'd lose their funding.
Joe?
Yeah, well, the only advice I got from them when I rang them up, when I knew they were, well, I rang them up to arrange an audit. They said, well, we'll arrange the audit. You just go find yourself a good criminal lawyer. And that was the only help I got from them. There was no question of where's the money gone, you know, could it be this, could it be that? They just said, you go find yourself a lawyer. I mean, they knew it was inevitable, you know, why didn't they stick up for me? So, yeah, they are in bed with the Post Office, unfortunately. And Justice Fraser's judgment bears that out.
And so do you believe that they share some of the culpability for what's happened. As
Yeah, I mean, they had our membership fees.
You to work out that this was a widespread issue.
They must have known. They must have known. But it will come out of the inquiry.
I really hope they do, because what I heard there, it just absolutely blew my mind, really. Can you imagine being accused of fraud by the Post Office, and then you contact the National Federation of Sub-postmasters, and they're no help whatsoever? They're practically in bed with the Post Office too. But anyway, let's get on with what the director of Fujitsu, Paul Patterson, said, where the chair starts off with a simple question. But the interesting bit for me was when the chair, Liam Byrne, brought up the idea of Fujitsu having a moral obligation on contributing to compensation.
Thank you. Mr. Patterson, could I start with you, please? Would you say that Fujitsu is an ethical company?
Firstly, if I may just comment on what I've just been listening to this morning, to the sub-postmasters and their families. Fujitsu would like to apologise for our part in this appalling miscarriage of justice. We were involved from the very start. We did have bugs and errors in the system, and we did help the Post Office in their prosecutions of the sub-postmasters. For that, we are truly sorry. To your question, Chair, around our ethics, I believe we are an ethical company. The company today is quite different to the company in the early 2000s, and clearly we need to demonstrate that both to our customers, to government, and to the wider society here in the UK.
I've got in front of me, Mr. Patterson, the Fujitsu Code of Conduct. It says, we treat customers, business partners and competitors fairly and with respect. Did you live up to those values when it came to the sub-postmasters?
No, we did not. It is very clear from the evidence before the committee and also in the inquiry that our standards were not at the level that we adhere to and state, as you've rightly read. I am personally appalled by the evidence that I have seen and what I have saw on the television drama and the statements I've seen from the victims to the inquiry. So we did not stand up to that in those periods of time.
And do you accept that Fujitsu evidence was used to put innocent people in prison?
Yes, there was evidence from us. We did have we were supporting rather the Post Office in their prosecutions. There was data given from us to them to support those prosecutions, so yes.
Do you accept that before 2010, your staff knew that there were problems with the Horizon system?
The information that was shared with the Post Office as part of our contract with them was very clear. So the Post Office also knew there were bugs and errors. They also
just to zero in on this, did staff in your organisation before 2010 know that there were problems with the Horizon system?
So I believe that
Simple yes or no?
Well, I don't personally know, Chair. I think the inquiry is looking at that very point that you.
What's your gut feel?
My gut feel would be yes.
Okay. So you've said that you're an ethical company. You've said that your evidence was used to put innocent people in prison. You've said that staff in your organisation knew that there were problems with the system. Can you tell us how much you now think your company should contribute to the compensation bill?
The inquiry is dealing with some very complex matters over.
But is there a moral obligation, Mr. Patterson, for you to contribute?
I think there is a moral obligation for the company to contribute, and I think the right place to determine that is when our responsibility is very clear. There are many parties involved in this travesty.
But I've just read your last set of accounts which have been published. You've not made any provision in those accounts for a contribution to the compensation, but you're telling the committee today that you believe there is at least a moral obligation for Fujitsu to contribute.
When the inquiry finishes...
That's a simple yes or no.
Well, so
is there a moral obligation for Fujitsu to contribute?
I've already answered...
It's okay, you can keep going.
Okay, so yes, I believe there is a moral obligation, and I've already said that. I think it's also important that the inquiry deals with these very complex matters with all the parties involved. Yes, we have a part to play. Yes, the Post Office. Already this morning we've talked about lawyers, we've talked about the law. I think all of those matters need to be discovered to bring transparency and to bring the truth. And in that context, absolutely, we have a part to play and to contribute to the redress, I think is the words that Mr. Bates used, the redress fund for the sub-postmasters.
Very much.
Very interesting, eh? Haven't made any provisions to contribute to compensation. Clearly their bank account doesn't come under the name of moral obligations there. Very interesting. I also wondered if that was his very best puppy dog eyes look for the committee meeting, or was it actually just genuine contrition? I don't know. What do you guys think? Let me know down below. But I have to say, I felt so sorry for what these innocent people had to go through. Must have been horrendous. But anyway, I'll leave the video here and I shall bid you farewell and take care, my friends.